I can do that. And you're kind and merciful, Heavenly Father. We're truly thankful that you have been gracious to us and allow us to gather here tonight in person, remotely, through whatever means that we might hear your word, might be moved by it, especially these lessons about thy people and the plans you've had for them. How we can see their hand upon them, your love and care for them as they became a new nation. We thank thee for these insights and pray that we might have these things and teach it to those and all would want to know as we wait for that time when we open the mountain to rumble in the great lightning, in the great storm, as thy son stands upon it, and that the people might hear and see and say, this is truly the Son of the living God. This is our Messiah come again. This is our King, High Priest, and a prophet of the Lord God of Israel. We pray to hear these things and pray to hear them soon. We thank you for all these things in the name of thy Son, Jesus the Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Walter. That was a great prayer.
Thank you. That was very
Beautiful. So, this is we're getting towards the exciting conclusion. So I want to go over it again and make sure we had gotten some of this. So we had covered I don't know why this is backwards.
You're going the wrong way.
Oh, I'm going forward or backwards?
You're going forward right now. Now you're going
Okay.
backwards.
Okay, there we go.
Yeah, we covered all that.
Okay, so I just want to review. This is very important because I want you to think back and you just cannot calm down, girlfriend. Leah's causing havoc over here.
Jeff was afraid I would destroy one of his precious treasures.
I know. So the important thing to realize is that in Israel's history, was there any reparations by the Egyptians when they left Egypt after serving there for 430 years?
Any regret?
Reparations.
Oh, yeah.
They got booty. They
Yeah.
got the gold and the silver when they left town, and they took it with them. Okay, so did they get anything when they left Babylon and Media Persia?
They got the things that belong to the,
Yes, they did.
and they got lots of supplies from the government.
Exactly. So the government gave them money to go home and restore the land that they had destroyed. Okay.
Mhm.
So that happened in Babylon and Media Persia. So after the Romans, they never really gave reparations for what they did. But all over Europe, they never gave reparations until we get to this. So that's why West Germany, when they did this, they started the talks in 1951. Before we go back to it, what did they give them monetarily and for what purpose? So it's Konrad Adenauer is the prime minister for West Germany. He made the deal with Ben-Gurion in 1953 when they actually wrote him a check. What was the monetary basis? So we know they took over $6 billion from European jewelry in Germany during World War II. $6 billion from just, and I think that's a low mark. But they gave back how much, first of all? I just want you guys to have this in your head so you can use
6
it.
million.
They gave them 1.6 billion back in reparations, which is still a lot of money. What I want you to know, this was extremely divisive in Israel. You can present both arguments to me. Why should we take the money?
Because they took it from us. They took everything from us.
Right, that, and they needed the money desperately. High inflation, high unemployment. They had just gotten through the Independence War. There was so much infrastructure that needed to be built. We need houses for all these people who are coming to our country. So there was a very strong argument for taking the money. What was the argument against taking the money?
We don't want any of your filthy money from Germany.
Right, blood money. But it was blood money because it, I'm like, it was the Jews' money. So, I don't understand not taking it back. So they had 32 major organizations that helped make this decision. So what they based it on, this is what I want you to remember when you walk away from here, is that it was based on the number of refugees Jewish refugees from Germany who migrated back to Israel. So that's 500,000. Multiply that times $3,000 per person, and you will arrive at the total amount they got back. Okay. So it'd be $1.5 billion back then, equivalent to $15.7 billion by 2021 today by their dollars. But you all need to see Monuments Men if you get a chance, because that is about the American government seizing all these assets before the war was over. It's 1945, and they're literally hunting down, what did they do with all the gold, all the silver, all the art, all the artifacts that were stolen from the Jews, from everybody else. So that is that movie. And
What's it called?
Monuments Men. And it's about getting back all of this property. So they hid most of it in copper mines, salt mines, wherever they could. Now, what was the big rush? Why was it so important to get to this stuff fast?
So it was the Jews that hid their own possessions?
Oh, no. This was all seized by the Nazis when they took their homes, their businesses, and chucked them in concentration camps.
Mhm.
So they had taken all their wealth and put it in these places as a storage facility until they could be used at a later time.
Mhm.
So the deal is that Russia was coming from the east across, and it was a race against time to get there first and figure it out first before the Soviets took all the cache of wealth out of there.
Yeah, you never see it again.
Because you would never see it again. It would never be returned to the people it should have been gone to. So that's what all this was about. You can see all of it here. The agreement that was finally struck, and basically this is Ben-Gurion at Adenauer's funeral in 1967, the same year as the 6-Day War. Okay. So what I want you to remember about these reparations, again, they used it for infrastructure, for roads, for water, for electricity, for housing, for all the things they needed. So it wasn't anywhere near to the amount that was stolen, but what it was an acknowledgement of what had been done, the atrocities that had been committed. And I think it's pretty remarkable. So, and I want to put a slide in there about, the other nations and what they gave back. This is the continuous population growth from 1948, which was slightly less than 1 million. So it was 800,000 to almost the 70th anniversary, which is over 8 million. So you can see it is a steady line of increase over the years. It's pretty remarkable. And basically the way you can remember the world's population of Jews is that 1/3 live in Israel, 1/3 live in the United States, and 1/3 around the rest of the world. Okay. So that's a useful little tool to help you remember. We're going to get into, did we do the Suez Canal crisis?
No, we didn't.
Okay, we did
That's
that.
where I think we're about where we left off.
Yes, right here.
Okay, so the importance of the Suez Canal crisis is threefold. It was a rehearsal. It was a practice for the 1967 war, exactly 10 or 11 years later, depending on how you count it. Okay, so they took the entire Sinai Peninsula. They helped crush the Egyptian army. So many things were echoed in the 67 war, and they did it overnight. So we're looking at this from the end of October to before Christmas, all the Suez Canal crisis happened. So let's go back and talk about what had happened. What year was the Suez Canal built, and by whom?
What is like 19?
You guys are killing me.
I wasn't around for that class.
It was built in 1869, so 100 years before I was born.
The British.
And the British did it. It was a major feat of engineering. It saved people from having to go around all of Africa every time they wanted to get to the Far East. It was a direct route from the Mediterranean straight through to the Indian Ocean. I mean, it's pretty amazing. So the British Canal, the Suez Canal Company was privately owned, belonged to Great Britain. And President Nasser of Egypt was playing everybody off against each other. Okay, so he asked Great Britain and the United States to fund his Aswan High Dam project, right? Then the Suez Canal crisis happens, and they're like, we're revoking all our loans to you because you took the Sinai Canal. So he laughs at them, gets the money from Russia, and says, choke on your anger, America and Great Britain, choke on it. So then the Suez Canal crisis happens when he takes this. And so Prime Minister of Great Britain at the time was Anthony Eden. He was the first prime minister since Churchill. And he was itching and itching and itching for this position. He was always sickly and going down to Jamaica to recover from his health. And then this crisis happens, and he plays everything backwards and the opposite of how he should. So through back channel diplomacy, Israel was invited by France and England to come up with a plan. Israel would attack and do all the stuff you see on this chart, drop in with paratroopers and take the Suez Canal, take the Sinai, and then they would come in and say, stop all this fighting, we'll come in and take over this whole situation. Well, it wasn't sanctioned by anybody in the UN or the United States. President Eisenhower was not informed and not for it because it was, in his mind, British imperialism again. So when it was over, Israel was promised by France and Great Britain that this the Gulf of Aqaba would always remain open to them, and the Straits of Tiran, I believe, or no, Straits of, help me out. Oh gosh, I can't think of the name of it. Anyway, would never be closed to them. So they made this deal, even though Israel had taken the whole Sinai, and they gave it back with that promise. When 67 happened, and they went back to France and England and said, they've closed the Straits of Hormuz, that's what it is, Straits of Hormuz, to the Gulf of Aqaba, they said, oh, 1956 isn't 1967. What an answer to give to people you have made a pact and a deal and a treaty with. So they did not hold up their end of the bargain. So let's go over this really quick because it's short again and super fast. So the end of October and the 29th, Israeli paratroopers dropped east of the town of Suez. Then on the 30th, more paratroopers east of Milta Pass, troops began crossing the border. Then on the 31st, British troops drop on Cairo and the Cairo International Airport to crush that. In other words, for the Egyptian aircraft not to be able to take off. On November 2nd, the Israeli paratroopers land in Al Tor, southwest of Sinai. Then the British paratroopers land west of Port Said. So this was a major involvement. Then the French paratroopers land south of the port of Said. Now, many of these people were probably World War II veterans who had been in the North Africa campaign and could see that this was echoing everything that happened during World War II. Then the Anglo-French invasion, forced bombardment and landings happened on November the 6th. So it was very fast. Anglo-French occupied most of the Suez Canal zone as far as Ismailia, and that was on the 7th. And then the United Nations says enough is enough, but that was with the push by Eisenhower because he wanted to stop all of this. Then November of the 23rd, the British and French forces withdrawal. The December 22nd, the withdrawal was completed at midnight, and then Israel withdrawals complete in March of 57. So I want you to remember this: the United Nations occupied the whole Sinai Peninsula for 10 years, okay, between 1956 and 1967. It's the president of Egypt in 67 who says to the UN, get out. Why? Because they didn't want them witnessing that they were about to attack Israel. They didn't think they would actually leave. They left, created a power vacuum, giving Israel the way in to fly over and destroy Egypt's whole air force. Okay, so that's the things I want you to remember: the closing of the Straits of Hormuz, that this was a dry run for 67, and that they could have taken it all back. So I'm gonna play this. So this is a video.
All right, so remember, you have to turn your mic off and I have to turn this one on, I think, for it to work right. Yeah, it's on your computer too. All right, well. We had it set up last week, perfect.
Can you all hear it?
They're not gonna hear anything.
Okay, so I'm backing it up.
Hold on. So as long as, I know we can't have both mics on at the same time, but when you play it, no sound's gonna come out of there. I have to get the sound to come out of here. Sounds not coming out. Oh, I have to hear it.
Tell me when.
Oh, you're not playing it.
Well, I stopped it because they couldn't hear anything.
Well, I need for it to hear it to know whether it's working. It's not. And we don't have the same setup we had the other week, so I can't find where it went. And that's not gonna help to change that. All right. All right, then. I have to figure it all out again.
All right, we're gonna just skip this for now. All right, can you all hear me again? Can you hear me all right?
And this one. Now it's good.
All right.
Now we got it coming from the wrong place.
That's all I know.
Right, and then I gotta get it to stop coming out here and get it to come out there.
We're hearing a loud echo.
Right. Because you have the sounds now coming out of here
I got
and
you.
it needs to come out of there. So there we go again.
Can you mute your side?
I'm working on. Now. Oh. I think your mic is totally muted now over there. So let me see if I can get mine. The problem is you get it muted in the software, but then the hardware takes over. I'm trying to get it. Hey.
It'll be a silent picture.
This side. Yes.
That's President Nasser. Sorry, guys.
You'll have to start playing them and give us a synopsis of what's going on.
Yeah, so the French and the British Navy went in and shut down the whole canal, took it over, and then by November the 7th, the United Nations basically sent a halt and desist order. And then the United Nations came in and took over the whole event. But Eisenhower basically said he didn't support this because he didn't know about it, and it all went back to the way it was. Now we just need to stop echoing so it can continue.
I'm going to get things fixed. Aha. And now it's really good. Oh. Did I do it? Nope.
Can you hear me now? You still hear it? There it go.
There's a live mic. More than one live mic, but figuring things out at the same time. And trying to figure out why this one won't stop.
What if you were to leave the meeting on your end?
Sorry, say.
What if you left the meeting on there? Would
And
it?
the whole meeting will stop
Okay.
at the moment. So hold on.
I was Thanksgiving.
See. Turn your mic on. So. What up? Now, try it.
It's on now.
Now talk.
Okay. Thank you for that brief interlude from our sponsor. All right. So the 67 war taught us a lot about the UN forces that were in the Sinai. The Straits of Hormuz were very important to Israel. They were closed. So I want to emphasize what happens next, because it started in 1960 and it progressed with Adolf Eichmann. Okay. What everybody should know from history, from your education, is the Nuremberg trials. So when the Soviets, the British, and the Americans took Berlin, there was an international tribunal that was set up in Nuremberg, Germany, where as many witnesses from the Holocaust could be brought in to bring to trial the top Nazi high command. Who was not there?
This guy.
Well, he was one of them. He was arrested, but he escaped from the Americans, wandered all over Europe for 5 years, was assisted by the Catholics.
I know where he
and-
was killed.
And well, in Jerusalem, we're going to get there. We're gonna talk about this whole thing.
Go get him and
Argentina. We're
Yes,
coming.
thank you.
We're coming. Don't spoil the story.
I've heard it all already.
Anyway, so the issue is that Eichmann was the true architect of the entire Holocaust, and many of the Nazi high command were able to escape through back channels and get to South America. But in Israel, I want to describe the climate because it was so different. How were Holocaust survivors viewed in Israel from 48 to 60s, early 60s?
By the Jews?
So the Holocaust survivors living in Israel from 1948 till the Eichmann trial, how were they treated?
Probably like heroes.
You would think. You would.
You would. I mean, you
But-
talk about by their own fellow Jews or what?
Right. They were not. They were treated as second-class citizens. There was a stigma against the Holocaust survivors, and here's why. They had created the new Jew who was modern, self-sufficient, powerful, and everything else. They did not understand the Holocaust survivors. The Holocaust survivors, in many cases, suffered from so much stress from what had happened to them, but also the guilt of why did they survive and 6 million others did not. 500,000 Jews returned to Israel and they were treated like second-class citizens. And the major reason behind it was that modern Jews who were born in Israel were like, why didn't you fight for yourselves? Why didn't you beat your captors and get out of there? It's sort of like everybody who watches Gilligan's Island and says, why don't they just fix the boat and go home? You know, you weren't there. You don't know the situation. I'm sorry, I'm comparing fiction with reality, but that was the view. What busted this wide open for the whole Jewish consciousness was what really happened. And the strongest piece of evidence was when they brought up a survivor from Auschwitz, put him on the stand and asked him that question. Why didn't you fight back? Why didn't you defeat your captors and take over Auschwitz? And he said, a couple miles away from Auschwitz was a Polish death camp. They could have taken over, they never did, and defeated the Germans. And guess what? They are Polish people in a concentration camp in Poland. These are their native people all around them. If we got out and defeated our captors, we had no place to go. No place to go. And that was the message that resonated through the populace. That and many, many other things. But that was a big eye-opener. When this case came to trial, it really shook everybody up. So I want to talk about that for just a second. So basically, it's the Mossad, which is the secret service for Israel that came to Germany and found us out. So "El momento, señor" were the only 3 words the Israeli intelligence Peter Malkin knew in Spanish, but these were about to change the course of history. Malkin's utterances of the words to the balding Mercedes-Benz factory worker headed home from work on May 11th, 1960. When the man reluctantly acknowledged him, Malkin sprang into action and with the help of 3 other agents wrestled the man to the ground and into his car. As they sped away, they tied him down and covered him with a blanket in the back seat. This wasn't your average abduction. The man in the back seat was one of the world's most notorious war criminals, Adolf Eichmann, a Nazi official who had helped Germany carry out the mass murder of 6 million Jews during World War II. For years, he had evaded authorities and lived in relative peace in Argentina. Now he was in the custody of the Mossad, Israel's secret service, and his once secret crimes were about to become not only public knowledge, but international knowledge. So, of course, everybody condemned Israel for doing this, for abducting him and bringing him to trial in Israel. He was arrested by the Americans and escaped. I mean, there should have been a bounty on his head internationally. But the big deal was how the capture actually happened is totally fascinating. Adolf Eichmann's son in Argentina had a Jewish girlfriend. The girlfriend was figured out this whole thing from Mossad, or Mossad contacted them, and that's how they found out the boyfriend's father is Adolf Eichmann. And that's when they spearheaded this whole mission to go there, find a safe house, capture him, bring him back, and then somehow get him out of the country. So can I get a reader, Walter?
Okay, let's see. Well, Gerald, you're at the top of the list right now. Go for it.
All right, Eichmann's capture, interrogation,
Hear
and
you,
trial
Hmm.
were part
Yeah,
of one
yours-
of history's
yours
most
turned off.
ambitious secret missions. The logistics, that is, of the capture were incredible, says Guy Walters.
He's talking, but you're not bringing any sound out to the TV. So your machine's turned off your speakers.
There's a book called Mossad by
One second,
Michael,
Gerald. We can't actually hear you. We're working on it.
All right,
Michael.
I'm unmuted.
Oh yeah, there's a movie too. It's
Oh, is
very
there?
great. Oh yeah,
I'll
the
have to
movies.
see
I
that.
can
Ben
hear it.
Kingsley plays
I
Adolf
can hear
Eichmann.
Oh,
Gerald.
He
really?
does a phenomenal job.
Oh,
He's always
We can hear Gerald.
yeah.
We hear Gerald.
Tell us what the name of it is, if you know.
I'll find it on IMDb in just a second. So if you go there, you figure it out really
Okay.
fast.
I guess they
Yeah,
can't
yeah,
hear
yeah.
us.
We can't hear.
Okay, so just look up Ben Kingsley and
Gerald, say something for me.
Hello there.
We can hear.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? No, they're not hearing us.
Oh,
Yeah, we can hear them. That
it's
Yeah.
okay. I'll just read them because we've only got
Okay,
a half hour left anyway.
I guess they can hear you.
Can you all hear us? Can anybody?
Yeah,
Yeah,
they're
we
there.
can hear
I
you.
mean, if I turn on this, we can hear them, but it's gonna make a lot of racket, you see.
Okay.
So
I
I
don't know
leave
what's
it
going
on.
on. So Eichmann's capture, interrogation, and trial were part of the history's most ambitious secret missions. The logistics of the capture were incredible, says Guy Walters, author of The Hunting Evil, the Nazi war criminals who escape the quest and bring them to justice. So that's one of many books on this. It is like a movie plot that occurs in real life, and it woke the world up to the Holocaust. But that awakening and the Eichmann capture was decades in the making. So another book I would recommend is Eichmann in Jerusalem, and that's by it's a female author. She's a journalist. Ehrman, I can't remember her last name anyway.
The movie is called Operation Finale.
Yeah, Operation Finale. Yep, that's good.
It's in 2018.
It's very, very good. So when he first joined the Austrian Nazi Party in 1932, few would have predicted that Adolf Eichmann had a future as a mass murderer. But Eichmann was both a skilled bureaucrat and a committed anti-Semite. He rose swiftly through the ranks of the party, and by 1935, he was already helping the Nazis plan its answer to the so-called Jewish question. Nazi terminology for the debate over how European Jews were to be treated, and they finally came up with the code name Final Solution. That was the answer to the Jewish question. These death camps that happened all over the place. These are children at Auschwitz, their pictures. It's just unbelievable what happened to them all. So though he later claimed that he was just following orders, and that's kind of the argument he stood behind, I didn't make any of my own decisions. I was just following orders for what they told me to do. Eichmann helped the Nazis tackle the logistical problem of mass murder. He attended the Wannsee Conference, and the meeting at which the group and the high-ranking Nazi officials coordinated the details of what they later called the final solution. Though he did not make the decisions there, he took notes on the conference and prepared data that would be used by higher-ranking officials to determine exactly how to murder Europe's Jewish population. After the conference, Eichmann helped implement the genocide, coordinating the deportation and murder of hundreds of thousands of Jews in German-occupied areas. But though many of the architects of the Holocaust were arrested, tried at Nuremberg, and executed after the war, Eichmann escaped justice. After the capture by Americans at the end of the war, he escaped, changing his identity multiple times as he traveled throughout post-war Europe. In Italy, he was given aid by the Catholic priests and bishops with pro-Nazi sympathies and reached Buenos Aires, Argentina in 1950. So from the end of the war until he got out in 1950, he stayed there for basically 10 years in Argentina, trying to live low profile as long as he could. And then daggone it, his son started dating a Jewish girl. So that ruined it.
Will not be mine.
Yep. I just think that's so ironic. That's why I say God's hand is in it all.
It's in-
Roger, you want to read this one?
It's a real small for me.
Oh, get up close, dude.
I'll read it.
Go ahead.
But there was a new state that was very interested in arresting Eichmann, Israel. Thanks to Lothar Hermann, a blind Jewish refugee who had fled to Argentina after being imprisoned in, how do you say it, Dachau?
Dachau.
Yeah, that's right.
They learned of his whereabouts and began planning one of history's most ambitious captures. When Hermann discovered Eichmann was in Argentina through his daughter, Sylvia, who dated one of Eichmann's sons, he wrote to Germany with the information. A German Jewish judge, Fritz Bauer, asked for more details, so with Sylvia's help, Hermann provided Eichmann's address. Worried that Nazi sympathizers would alert Eichmann to any German investigation, Bauer covertly tipped off Mossad, the Israeli Secret Service, instead. Mossad assembled a snatch team, most of whom had seen their entire families wiped out during the Holocaust, to abduct Eichmann. Their goal was not just to capture him, but to get him back to Israel where he could be tried publicly for his crimes. The plan was simple enough. As the team spied on Eichmann, they realized that his routine was extremely predictable. They decided to capture him as he walked back home after getting off of a city bus after work. The carefully orchestrated plan to abduct Eichmann on May 11, 1960 was almost foiled when Eichmann didn't get off the bus at the expected time. Half an hour later, though, Eichmann got off of a later bus. Malkin and his associates accosted him on a quiet, dark street. They took him to a safe house in Buenos Aires, where he was interrogated for days before he was drugged and put on a plane to Israel. The hidden home of Adolf Eichmann in San Fernando, Argentina, circa 1960. Wow, that's really remote.
Yep, and it's small too. But it's just amazing because they were able to capture him and bring him back, but they literally put him in a uniform of the airline, drugged him so he looked like he was drunk, and got him on the plane. So pretty amazing stuff. Linda, you want to read that?
Sure. The trial that followed was among the first to be televised in its entirety. Gripped millions with its emotional testimony and its first-person views of the reality of the Holocaust. At the trial, Eichmann presented the same deceptively normal facade he had kept up in Argentina, an image of a meek bureaucrat who simply followed orders. That image caused political theorist Hannah Arendt to coin the term the banality of evil, arguing that Eichmann was not a psychopath, but a normal human. Actually, Eichmann was a rabid, zealous key Nazi who was absolutely delighted to do his bit to try and kill as many Jews as possible, says Walters. He wasn't just a functionary, though he insisted to the end that he wasn't responsible for the Holocaust. Adolf Eichmann was found guilty by a special tribunal. He was hanged on May 31st, 1962.
So it was 2 years from the time they captured him and he was killed. They captured him in May of 60 and he was executed by the end of May in 62. But pretty amazing. Can they say whether they can hear me or not or no?
Yeah.
Okay. Can you hand the mic back over?
Why would anybody argue that he was not a psychopath? I mean, how could you come to that conclusion?
The
That he
point-
was normal, I mean.
The point was, and this is the author, I couldn't remember her name, Hannah Arendt. She wrote Eichmann in Jerusalem. She wrote the whole trial series. She wanted to show that there's accountability. What everybody always says about Hitler and Mussolini and all these people, they're crazy. If they're crazy, then they're not guilty. They're not culpable. What she's trying to show is he knew exactly what he was doing. And he was not a psychopath. He was, and that's why she calls it the banality of evil, because her point was this kind of evil can come from anyone. It's whether or not you give into this kind of evil. So I just thought that was a great point that she did make. At first, I had the same reaction as you about Hannah Arendt, but once you read Eichmann in Jerusalem by her point is that he was one of many cogs that continue to roll forward without thinking,
Mhm.
without assessing, without evaluating what they were doing or what the outcome might be. And so that's why I think it's really amazing. So this woke up the world, and it woke up the Jews in America as well as in Israel, because this trial was such a huge deal. So it did have a huge impact on the society. Now we're going to get on into the 6-Day War, but we're probably not going to finish it by the end of class. Everybody in Christadelphia knows this one pretty well, but I would say the echoes of it were in the 48 War, because you had all these Arab states trying to attack and destroy the country. Then they had their own dry run of the event, as I told you, in the Suez Canal incident. And in 67, it was kind of boiling over. Okay, so the president of Egypt at that time was still Nasser. Okay, his vision for Egypt was bigger than just Egypt. He got the Suez Canal, right? He took it from the British. He got his Aswan High Dam. They even had to move Egyptian artifacts upstream and out of the way so that they could build this huge dam. By the way, what's happening today, other countries upstream of the Nile are building their own dam, and Egypt is furious because it's going to stop the water supply to them. So pretty funny stuff. What's happening here is that Nasser in Egypt wants to create this new utopia. It's going to be the pan-Arab world, okay? But to be the leader of the pan-Arab world, you have to show yourself as the aggressor. The best way to do that is to go up against Israel. That is a lot of what happened. I have a great book in the other room. I'll have to share this with you, but was put out by Cambridge University Press. And they sent historians to all the major countries who were involved in the 6-Day War, because the reactive revisionist historians have come back and said what about Israel during the 6-Day War?
That they were the aggressor or something?
That they were aggressor,
Yeah.
number one. Number two, what? Empire building. Number three, land grab. Number four, that they were expansionists.
Yeah.
So all these things were untrue. So once the archives were opened up, because it had been so many years since the war, then they could go to Jordan, then they could go to Egypt, then they could go to Syria, then they could go to Iraq, then they could go to Iran and Russia and England and France and the United States and find out what was the actual business notes, what were the phone call transcriptions, what was actually happening in this 6-day war period in all these countries. So then each historian had one country that they presented as a paper at Cambridge University. They all presented, and the findings were universal, that the Arabs were the aggressors, that they came in and were going to destroy Israel, not just take over their land, but genocide, push them into the ocean. And they found out about it, luckily, in time, and turned it all around. This is still the most controversial war in the entire Middle East, 1967. Today, it is the whole root of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, okay? So even though it was a huge triumph and they got these lands, these enemies to the Jewish state today have been nothing but terrorists all along in dealing with Israel. They've gotten weapons from the countries that hate Israel, and they can strike as much as they want, and nobody says anything internationally. If Israel defends itself in any way, what does the international community do?
They start whining.
Well, we would call it whining, but they protest. They say it's wrong. It's human rights activists. So now they've used that as an excuse. The latest thing, this comes directly from the Palestinians and their leaders, is like, we need a new weapon. We need a weapon of rhetoric. Okay, so the rhetoric is going to be Zionism is racism. And we live in an apartheid state because that's so unpopular in South Africa.
Mhm.
None of that is true. And it's just sickening because it never stops. You know, they are in Israel because they can't live anywhere else without persecution. And now they're constantly being persecuted about defending themselves. So I just want you to understand that. And then in the north, Syria was furious over water issues with Israel in 1966 and 1967. That little battle was going on. So Israel was using, as it can, because it's in their territory, they were using the Sea of Galilee to get fresh water and bring water to the Negev and to other areas of Israel. Well, Syria was like, that's our water, not yours. So what we're going to do is we're going to drill underwater pipelines to get to the Sea of Galilee and draw that water out for ourselves. So that was on the northern side. Jordan was kind of ambivalent, but they were always helping out with Israel and Syria. They got played like you would not believe during the 6 Day War. They lost their army, they lost territory, they lost a lot because they listened and aligned themselves with Syria in the north and Egypt in the south. So they really looked quite stupid by the end of the war.
Did you hear that the United Nations just had a vote like this past week, 90-30 with 45
Abstentions.
thank you, abstentions, 47 abstentions, to call the day that Israel became a nation a word, it's Nakba Day, which means catastrophe. So 90 nations voted to call the day that Israel became a nation a catastrophe.
The United Nations has had more sanctions against Israel for human rights than any of the countries it should have that were legitimate, like Rwanda, like Sudan, Ethiopia, China, that has whole concentration camps that are still existing today for the people who don't agree with what the politics are. North Korea, which has starved its people on numerous occasions. Roger, would do me a huge favor since you're closest. Can you give me some more water? I am just so thirsty tonight. Thank you very, very much. So initially, the Johnson administration sought to convince Egyptian President Gamal Abdullah Nasser and the Soviet leadership to work towards the regional arms control regime, but neither the party proved receptive. Thus, in 1965, Johnson agreed to sell Israel A-48, A-3 tanks following the A-4 Skylark aircraft in 1966. The rationale behind these sales, as the National Security Council, thank you so much, Robert Comer put it, was that Arab knowledge and that they could not win an arms race against Israel should contribute long-term to the dampening down of the Arab-Israeli dispute. So, for the United States, Israel's the only democracy. It's our only ally, really, in the Middle East. Who is allied with Egypt, Syria, Jordan, Lebanon, all the rest of the countries pretty much in the Middle East?
Russia.
And Russia finds partnership among a lot of those guys.
In Russia, it was, sorry, in the 60s, it was Russia.
Yeah.
That was supplying them weapons, training them, the whole 9 yards. So, Leah, do you want to read the next few bullets?
Okay. Despite President Johnson's deep emotional commitment to Israel, he was slow to come to Israel's defense during the buildup to the 1967 war. Resolving that paradox requires understanding the pressure created by Vietnam and the U.S. national security bureaucracy's attitude towards Israel. Johnson was the most emotionally committed to Israel of any American president, a fact that is not popularly known but is clear from his background. As Senate Majority Leader, he tried to persuade President Eisenhower to avoid imposing sanctions on Israel for not pulling out of the Sinai. He was also the first president to give Israel offensive weapon systems, despite opposition from the State Department.
Mhm. And I just want you to know the American State Department has never been helpful to Israel. They have been against them all along the United Nations, except when they voted them into being a nation. As Leah just pointed out, they have over 300 and some, I think it's 350 sanctions against Israel, and it's undeserved. It's always because of envy, because they're so successful. So, on we go.
I think it was his grandmother that probably had something to do with that.
Because she was Christadelphian in high Texas.
That's my grandma.
So I don't know if this will play or not, if we can hear it.
No.
Anyway,
Sounds
is it not coming through?
we'd be able to hear it if it was.
Anyway, what did it say? You can
Oops.
read it.
No, it's video after that.
Oh,
Oh, we gotta fix that for next time.
God.
So anyway. The 6-Day War was an incredible feat. They never expected to get back all of that land, the Sinai Peninsula, the Golan Heights, the West Bank. But immediately the problem of maintaining order in these areas was a huge issue. It became an international problem. And we're going to see how it plays out. So same guys, same players, again in 1973, everybody is seething with anger from 1967 that they lost this territory, especially Egypt. Egypt thought it would create this pan-Arab state. They got whooped. Their whole air force was destroyed. So was Syria's. So was Jordan's. By the pretty much the first day of the battle, all three air forces were annihilated. And then there was a huge tank war, which I could show you a video on, but it's 45 minutes, that took place in Syria. So the Yom Kippur War was pretty vicious because they did it on Israel's highest, holiest day, on Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. And at that time, Golda Meir was the prime minister, incredible woman. She was, a lot of people were caught flat-footed in this incident, including Moshe Dayan, who is a great military leader and was thought of so well. For some reason, during this war, he couldn't make a decision. So anyway, Roger, you want to read that one?
All right, on the afternoon about.
You got to read louder without your hand over your mouth so people can hear you.
On the afternoon of October 6th, Israel was attacked simultaneously on two fronts by Egypt and Syria. With the element of surprise to their advantage, Egyptian forces successfully crossed the Suez Canal with greater ease than expected, suffering only a fraction of the anticipated casualties, while Syrian forces were able to launch their offensive against Israel positions and break through on the Golan Heights. The intensity of the Egyptian and Syrian assault, so unlike the situation in 67, rapidly began to exhaust Israel's reserve stocks of munitions. Israel's Prime Minister Golda Meir turned to the United States for aid, while the Israel General Staff hastily improvised a battle strategy. The reluctance of the United States to help Israel changed rapidly when the Soviet Union commenced its own resupply effort to Egypt and Syria. U.S. President Richard Nixon countered by establishing an emergency supply line to Israel. Even though the Arab countries imposed a costly oil embargo and various U.S. allies refused to facilitate the arms shipment.
So if you want to know why gas prices were so high in the 1970s, it was because we helped Israel in this Yom Kippur War, okay? That's also contributed to inflation going high, but it wasn't the only factor. But she made a phone call to the White House at 3:00 in the morning, woke him up and said, if you don't act now, Israel won't be around tomorrow, basically. And she wasn't joking, and it wasn't an exaggeration when you had all these countries running against them. Walter, can you read this one?
Sure. With reinforcements on the way, the Israel Defense Forces rapidly turned the tide. Israel succeeded in disabling portions of the Egyptian air defenses, which allowed Israeli is commanded by General Ariel Sharon to cross the Suez Canal, surround the Egyptian Third Army. On the Golan Front, Israeli troops at a heavy cost repulsed the Syrians and advanced to the edge of the Golan Plateau on the road to Damascus. On October 22nd, the United Nations Security Council adopted Resolution 338, which called for an immediate end to the fighting. Despite this, however, hostilities continued for several days thereafter and finally ceased on October 26th. Israel and Egypt signed a ceasefire agreement in November and peace agreements on January 18, 1974. The accord provided for Israeli withdrawal into the Sinai, west of the Milta and Gildi passes, while Egypt was there to reduce the size of its forces on the east bank of the canal. United Nations peacekeeping forces established a buffer zone between the two armies. This agreement was supplemented by another sign on September 4th, 1975. On May 31st, 1974, Israel and Syria signed a ceasefire agreement that also covered separation of their forces by a UN buffer zone and exchange of prisoners of war. In June, the oil embargo was lifted.
Okay, so it's just unbelievable what all happened here. And Nixon was embroiled in his own affairs called Watergate, which many of us remember.
Oh, yeah.
You know, he had planted tapes from his own secret little peeps and put them in the Watergate buildings that are right by the Potomac, it's right by the Kennedy Center. And they had taped the Democratic National Headquarters to try to get information. And then he kind of lied about it later on, and that got him into major trouble, and he was almost impeached. So I think he resigned before he could be impeached. But this was a major thing that he did to save Israel, and nobody even remembers this today. This is another phenomenal video, but we're not going to watch it. So perhaps most importantly, Americans can take comfort in knowing that when Israel's very survival was on the line, their president, already consumed with overwhelming challenges on the domestic front, took decisive action to ensure Israel's survival. Not to mention that Prime Minister Golda Meir would for the rest of her life refer to Richard Nixon as my president and credited him with saving her country. Nixon's biographer and historian Stephen Ambrose wrote about this. There were those monstrous events in real world history. Had Nixon not acted so decisively, who can say what would have happened? The Arabs probably would have recovered at least some of the territory they had lost in '67, perhaps all of it. They might have been destroyed Israel, but whatever might have been, there is no doubt that Nixon made it possible for Israel to win, at some point risk his own reputation at great risk of the American economy. He knew that his enemies would never give him credit for saving Israel, and he did it anyhow. So we'll stop there because, but I do want you to remember this little piece of information before we go any further. It's Leviticus 25:23, and the principle is this: the land belongs to God, all of it. He said this to the Jews when they were coming into the land. He said, the land is not to be permanently sold because it is mine, and you are only foreigners and temporary residents on my land. He's saying that to the Jews. God granted the Jews success in '67 to take back much of the land that was promised to them. And to their arch enemies, Sadat, they made a peace treaty and gave away what God had given to them. So here's my axioms that I will give to you, and you can try to disprove them. One is, if you give away God's land in Israel, there will be severe consequences. Number two, land for peace treaties will never work. The land you give away will become a snare to you and never give you peace. Number three, if you break God's axiom, you will forfeit your own life. And this happens in every single case that I'm going to present to you. So that kind of wraps up what we're going to talk about with the 6-Day War and the Yom Kippur War. But now we're going to see a lot of Israeli leaders who are willing to do a land for peace deal, and they never get the peace. So we'll stop there for tonight. Roger, if you want to give a closing prayer.
Our great and loving Heavenly Father, tonight we've once again be reminded of the history that has taken place in your land and the things that have happened in our lifetimes that we have witnessed, and the hatred for Israel and all the people in this world who would love to see her go back to where she was. And we are blessed to have this understanding from your scriptures that these things have to happen and that you are completely in charge. And we know that you will continue to carry these things out till its final end. We understand when your son sits on the throne of David in Jerusalem, and then they will look upon him whom they have pierced and mourn greatly. We know there's some sad days coming ahead, but in the end, there will be glorious days when all peoples, nations, and languages will go year by year to Jerusalem to worship the Lord. May that day soon come, and may we be there to take part in it. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you.